Hello, everybody. I hope you all have been doing well. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. Hi, Don't Feed the Bears. Hi, Hitchhiker Hobbit. Great to see you both. Hope you both are doing well. Let me know if you can hear me okay. And if, as we go through, let me know if everything looks okay on your end. Oh, no worries at all. Don't feed the bears. No problem. Good, good. I'm glad everything sounds good on your end. It's always very funny when I start a live stream because I start it on a screen with no sound while I'm kind of waiting for things to get going. And every time I do, my software that I use to stream always like gives me a little bit of a note that is like, "Hey, you may not have noticed, but like you have no sound." And I'm like, "Don't worry, I got it." Good. I'm glad everything sounds good. Oh, no worries at all, Hitchhiker Hobbit. That is not a problem. I'm actually probably just going to move my microphone a little bit because it's kind of in the way of me being able to transition my slides. So, sorry for the background noise there. Get that cord out of the way. To anybody who is here right now, I hope you all have been having a good week or two since I've been on stream. Hi, Metaloop. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here today. Hope you've been doing well. Hi, Butterfly. Good to see you. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited to have you here. I think we're going to have fun. While we wait to see if anybody else kind of wanders in, since it's kind of just turned 12:01 my time, and I had the live set for 12. Oh, thank you, Don't Feed the Bears. I'm glad I can be the highlight. I'm sorry that your last week or two haven't been so good. I hope things improve for you, and I hope that we can have some fun today together and take your mind off of everything that's going on. But while we wait to see if anybody else comes to join us, I'll just go through my housekeeping really quick while we're here on this screen before we really dive into anything. So the first point of interest is that my Augusty analysis is now concluded. So it's out now for you to watch, which means I'm now done with the Welcome Home BTS series, which was a much bigger project than I had originally intended and took me a lot longer. But I'm really happy with how all those videos turned out. I hope you all have enjoyed them and had fun watching them. So the full Welcome Home BTS series is now up on my channel in a playlist called Welcome Home BTS. The next video that I'm working on is going to be called The Power of Purple. If you were here for my kind of start of the year live broadcast when I kind of gave a yearly preview like of what's to come this year, I had mentioned wanting to do this video. I'm hoping to see if maybe I can have it done before Ariran comes out. So just because I think it's very relevant to, you know, the idea of like a new BTS comeback, and my notion for this is kind of like what it means to like what BTS and ARMY's relationship means and how it's unique, kind of tracing how purple became not only just BTS's color, but like this way of life for BTS and ARMY. So I'd like to get that one up and running for around when Ariran comes out is my goal. So, and then my next live stream after this one is going to be Sunday, March 15th. As always, I'll let you know if that changes for any reason. And that's going to be sort of like our last chat before Ariran comes out. So it'll be kind of to share our thoughts and our theories and our ideas. And if you're going to make a bingo card, like in previous live streams, I talked about like making a little bingo card for what we might get comeback bingo. So if you are going to make a bingo card as well, make sure you have it done by then so we can talk about it a little bit, and I'll show you guys what's on my bingo card and we can talk about it, and then I want to hear your thoughts as well. Hello AK, good to see you. I'm so glad you could make it today. I hope you've been doing well. Right? Please don't feed the bears. It's been a long time since I've done bingo. I think it'll be fun. Comeback bingo. I'm looking forward to it. Even if I don't get anything right, I think it'll just be fun. You know, because I mean, this has been a very different, like, comeback vibe than I've, you know, grown accustomed to with BTS. Just in that it's kind of surprising to, I mean, Ariran comes out in like less than 3 weeks, which is crazy to say out loud. And we don't know anything about this album at all. We know its title. We know a vague idea of some of its themes. We know the boys have said it's very, you know, BTS-esque, but it's like we don't, as of the time that, you know, we're talking here right now, we don't really have much of anything else. So it'll be kind of interesting. Yeah, exactly. Hitchhiker Hobbit. It's been nothing, you know. So it's really interesting to kind of, you know, how will we get more stuff going forward? Are we going to go in completely no information? So it's just going to be interesting to compare our thoughts to what we actually get. Metaloop. Yeah, I totally feel you there. It was hard to pick what I wanted to put on the bingo card as well. In some senses, I almost kind of had to combine some thoughts into like one square just because, yeah. And I mean, I don't even mind if you make a longer bingo card, like if you make, you know, instead of bingo, if it spells out Bangtan or something, you know, you can make a supersized bingo card if that helps. Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to see everybody's like ideas and thoughts for the new album. It'll just, and I figure once Arirang has come out, I won't do a live stream like right after it comes out, because I figure that we'll really want to, you know, have some time to process, and kind of, I'm sure there'll be other stuff post the album coming out, so I won't do another live stream that Sunday right after comes out, I'll do it the next Sunday, which I think is like the 29th. Again, subject to change, but as of right now, I think that should be okay. I'll do one on the 29th, and we can kind of go over, hey, how accurate were our bingo cards? Did anybody get bingo? What were our thoughts? So I think that'll be fun. Hitchhiker Hobbit, yeah, it's interesting too, because it's like all of the other BTS comebacks that I've been a part of have been kind of like odd for one reason or another. Like, the comeback for B was very unique because that was just like their self-produced album during COVID, or even like the comeback for Proof, was very unique because it was just like the compilation album. So like I wasn't really a part of the comeback for Map of the Soul 7. I just kind of wandered in, so and that's, that was early in my army life, so it's like I wasn't really part of like the actual comeback prep and vibe and feeling for that. So it's really interesting. In some ways this is almost uncharted territory. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, don't be the bears. I totally get that. Because I'm very much that type of person. I get very like anxious and wondering what it is. So it is probably better that they're giving me less time to like be anxious and things like that. So yeah, in a way it might be better, but it's just a very unique process. So I'm very curious to see what the next like less than 3 weeks look like, and if we do get anything. But either way, it's going to be fascinating, and we can kind of all explore it and theorize about it together, which I'm really looking forward to. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started on the main idea for today, which is, of course, going to be talking a little bit more about the BTS universe and some theories. But this is going to be kind of a combination. Like, it's not going to be super, super structured. It's going to be like somewhere in between a casual chat and more of a structured thing. So, we're going to keep it kind of loose today. So, Butterfly Young, do you think we'll have a comeback show on Weverse? I hope so. I've always loved those. I just, like, again, I wasn't directly part of the Map of the Soul 7 comeback, but, I went and I watched stuff afterwards, and it was so fun watching, like, their premiere live that they did for that, because you could tell how excited they were for the album, and, that energy was just really infectious. Or even something like, I know they did some of those when Butter came out, for instance, I know they did like a little live on YouTube before, like, and it went right into the music video for Butter. And like, those are so fun because it just feels like we're watching the videos with them, or like we're anticipating the premiere with them. So I hope they do something like that. Metaloop, yeah, I'm right there with you. I love what we've gotten so far of the concept for Arirang. I love the, descriptions that surround that title and the meanings that surround that title, and we talked about that in a previous live stream. So I'm really, really on board with a lot of like the concepts and thoughts that I'm seeing so far, and that really like fills me with a lot of optimism. But yeah, we have no idea. I'm totally, I'm very flexible with a lot of like things like style and genre. I'm even pretty flexible on a lot of different concepts, but my hope is that we can see something in the vein of the previous albums, and I'm not saying that like retreading the same territory they've already, done or anything like that. But just kind of that sort of deep and thought-provoking and, speaking truth to power, like all the things that BTS has done consistently throughout like all of their albums and concepts. And it's just like, I definitely want something that has that depth. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna be as optimistic, optimistic for what we get. I'd like to think that based on what we know of this album, that we're going to get something that is deep. I really feel like, maybe there's gonna be some element of like portraying this as a journey, like the story of a journey, so I'm very much hoping that what we get is kind of what we all are seem like we're hoping for. So it'll be a lot of fun in my next live stream to go over bingo cards with everybody, because I think it'll be interesting to see. My bingo card, for example, is kind of a combination of what I think is going to happen and what I want to happen. Like, I'm not putting like too many like super out there crazy predictions, because I'm trying to keep it more like this is a combination of what I'm hoping for, but also what I think is realistically possible. So, and also to any of you who are on my Discord server, you're also more than welcome to show, like share like a screenshot of your bingo cards too. I'll probably do that, for mine ahead of time, but of course I'll also show mine in the live stream. But yeah, so for any of you participating in the bingo, and if you want to share it, please do. But yeah, I agree with you guys. I hope that it's just like that meaningful BTS style of looking at things, and just, they have such a unique perspective on things. So many of their albums prove that. And it's like, I want to see their unique perspective on this concept of Arirang. And it's like, what is their Arirang? And what does the journey mean to them? What does that idea mean to them? So I love what we have so far. I love what we've seen so far in terms of album concepts and album prep and album promotion. But, it'll be interesting to see where that keeps going. So. All right, so for today, we're going to get into the BTS Universe concept, just talking some theories and stuff, continuation of some previous conversations that we've had, we might get something related to the BU for Arirang. We have no idea, but, we've been talking a little bit about this kind of important element of their discography for a little while now. So today is going to be a bit of an interesting day as we kind of jump into some more like theoretical stuff with the BU. And just like with last time, I want to put up a content warning for the BU. The BU is very dark. It has a lot of topics involved in it. I'm not going to be getting like too into, kind of like in my last live stream, I got a lot more into like the actual nitty gritty of what happens in the BU. I'm not going to get as into like the nitty gritty. It's going to be more theories, but a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about in regards to like theories and things that happen in the videos, they'll still have mentions of these topics like abuse, self-harm, violence, and trauma, all the things that are portrayed within the BU, as well as the things that BTS were going through at the time that they made the BU, like depression, anxiety, self-hatred. So, just my content warning for today as we go through that. Hi, T-Style. It's good to see you. I hope you've been doing well. Oh, no worries. I know there's also like a severe delay between me talking and when like you guys actually hear it. So I know that like my chatting and your chatting is a little bit delayed. That's no problem. But in regards to your question, I'm hoping so. I'm hoping that I've actually been checking like every day. I even just checked this morning thinking, well, it's March 1st. Maybe we'll get some sort of calendar or promo schedule, and as far as I'm aware, I'm not seeing anything. So yeah, I've been checking like every single day, waiting to see if there's some sort of promotional schedule. Are we getting a pre-release track, like anything like that? Are we getting any type of things before the album, any type of comeback related activities? I don't know. So I'm hoping that we'll see something soon, but for now, still in the dark, unfortunately. Maybe something will come within the next few days. All right, so just like my previous live stream that I did where we were talking about the BTS universe, the same disclaimer exists for this one too. I'm not an expert in the BU. I became ARMY so much later than the BU. I became ARMY in 2020. And because I didn't know what the BTS universe was when I became an ARMY back in like the MOT 7 era, I watched a lot of the BU content out of order. So please take everything I am saying with a grain of salt or 2 or 3, because I wasn't ARMY going through the development of the BU with BTS, so. Suffering with the BU is a canonical event. Yeah, I like that description. It keeps pulling us back in. We will never escape it. So yeah, so today today is going to be a little bit interesting, which those of you who are on my Discord server might know. Those of you who saw my post in the community section of my channel might know, because I want to talk about BU theories, but I also want to talk about how I choose to analyze the BTS universe, which is a little bit different than what I think a lot of people do, and is even different than what I was actually thinking I was going to be doing when I started planning out this live stream. When I started planning out this live stream, my goal was to kind of like break down a lot of the videos and like the storyline and all of that, and really jump into, hey, here's what I think this means, here's what I think that means. And then my ideas kind of took a little bit of an abrupt turn. So hello, Sonia, I'm glad you could be here. We are discussing a little bit about the BTS universe today. We're going to be talking, I know I've done lives about the BU in the past, where I kind of I know I did one kind of breaking down like the HYYH era as a whole, and then I did another one sort of talking about the BU and kind of mapping out like the characters and things like that. And so today we're going to do a little bit of theorizing, but while I was putting this live stream together, I had an epiphany. Not that epiphany, not the epiphany that I'm the one I should love. I've already had that epiphany, but I had a different epiphany. So I'll just read out kind of what I typed up here, especially for those of you who are just listening. Whenever the BTS universe, the BU, and theories about it are discussed in ARMY circles, it tends to be with a focus on what the heck is happening in each of the videos. And we've talked about that in different live streams as well. So what is happening to the characters? How do the references relate to other videos? What is the plot? The BU is a storyline, so it makes sense that people want to analyze it like a book or a movie, and I did as well. But while researching for this live stream, I was looking up popular ARMY theories for what's happening in the BU and why, and I found a lot of great resources breaking down the whole plot. These videos use information, they're using information from the videos, HYYH the notes, the Save Me webtoon, the game BTS Universe Stories, and more. And in using that information, you can start deciphering a clear narrative. This plot makes so many of the random moments, events, and visual symbols make so much more sense throughout the BU-related content. But, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I found the answer way less satisfying than the question. I watched a couple of those videos describing, here's what happens in the BU, here's the whole plot, and it didn't really speak to me. It didn't resonate the way the BU resonates with me when it has no answer. So that notion of finding the answer unsatisfying entirely changed the way I want to approach the BU as a topic today, and it likely changed how I'm going to approach talking about the BU going forward. Talking about the BTS universe is something I'd still love to do in actual videos, not just live streams, and having this epiphany kind of really just changed how I want to discuss the BU in general. So it was a really interesting experience, kind of prepping for this live stream, because it kind of shifted my thinking. And I'll give you an example. So I'm not, just to be like 100% clear, I'm not saying that the quote unquote real answer of the BU is wrong and that I know better. I'm not saying that at all. I'm also not saying that these explanations, should be thrown out, because these explanations make a lot of sense. And I'm also not saying that the quote unquote explanation that we got was like completely made up after the fact, because I think there are a lot of images and Easter eggs in the BU that kind of only make sense when you look at the quote unquote real answer. So I'll give you an example. So one of the videos, which you would have seen if you were on Discord, but for those of you who aren't on Discord as often or aren't on the Discord server at all, I had shared with my Discord server a video that I had been using for research. It's by X Celeste, and it's like the entire story of the BU. She made it back, I think, in like 2020, and we hadn't really gotten any updates since then, so it kind of still holds. She made it after the release of BTS Universe Stories, and she is taking like the webtoon. She's taking that game, she's taking all the notes, like HYYH notes, and she's putting in that video, she puts everything together in like chronological order of how the plot unfolds. And like she worked so hard on that video. It is so good. It's such a good breakdown, but I really found the explanation super unsatisfying. So in her video, as a for instance, she is talking about, I have the pictures on screen. The top one is from the Lie short film, the bottom one is from the Save Me webtoon, and this is a great example of a plotline that makes more sense when you have that more cohesive plotline explanation. You understand, what that scene in the Lie short film is, where it shows a little sign that points to like grass and flower arboreum, and like, that comes back around, again later, but it's never like overtly explained in the music videos and in the actual BU content that we get in the videos, but it is explained when you take this plotline into account. So it's like, I'm definitely not saying that the plotline is wrong. I think a lot of that plotline actually helps these things make more sense. But what I am saying is that these explanations are plotlines only. They give us answers, but they lack real context. And I believe they lack the real power of the BU because they're more focused on giving the BU an actual plot that can be like followed and explained and kind of understood, because it's still a little bit confusing. But, the BU plot line, the goal of that is to have like a beginning, a middle, an end, to have a rising action, a falling action, to have character motivation and character growth and a plot line that is resolved. And I just feel like while that is, I'm sure that's like very, very satisfying for some people, and in some ways it was maybe even essential to sort of have a cohesiveness to the plot line, I do think it takes something away. Yeah, Sonia, that's exactly what I was feeling. I was just like, yeah, the BU for me actually doesn't need to be answered. And it's so interesting because I think, my theorist brain has always been like, oh, I really want to sit down and crack the code of the BU and figure out what's going on. And when you hear, oh, this is the explanation, it just actually didn't really do anything for me. Yeah, butterfly, I totally agree. It's really interesting to be able to interpret the pieces individually, and come to those conclusions. And actually, that's kind of what I ended up doing today when I kind of changed course, and sort of ended up analyzing, which you'll see as I go through my slides. I kind of ended up going through and analyzing, this is everything that is, related to the BTS universe in The Most Beautiful Moment in Life, and then in Wings, and then in Love Yourself. Agreed. Yeah, I agree, Butterfly Young. For me, like, it's so funny. After I watched that video, I was like really struggling to be like, how do I approach this when I don't like the actual plotline explanation? So I was talking to my mom a bit, and she was like, honestly, just delete the video from your head, and like the explanation from your mind. And I was like, yeah, honestly, I think I'm gonna do exactly that, because I think it's one of those things where, like, if you really wanted to analyze every single element of the BTS universe, and you really, really were desiring an answer, and you were like, I really, really need to know what this thing means or that thing means, then I think having that full breakdown is going to be great for your mind. But for me personally, I just think you lose some of the charm of the BU when it has a plot line, and when you have to, it can be a little bit frustrating if you're like, well, the only way I can make sense of this is if I have read all of the HYYH notes, and if I've read all of the Save Me webtoon, and I've played through all of BTS Universe Story. It's just like there's a lot of complex steps for something like that, and it's just like I prefer more of the story that we get in the videos. Yeah, yeah, and I think the best way to look at it is kind of like when I did my iceberg for the BTS universe in my last live stream about the BU, and I sort of said the reason why I felt like an iceberg chart really fit is because it shows you can go down as far as you want. Yeah, exactly, Meta Loop. Yeah, you can go down as far as you want and as far as you need to. Do I still have the slide of the iceberg? I do still have the slide of the iceberg in here. The iceberg that I made for the last BU discussion that we had, and kind of looking how you can, start at the top and just sort of stay at the top in, layers 1 and 2, or you can jump down a little bit to like 3, 4, and 5, where you get into like a little bit more of like lore building, thinking, being a scholar, and then, you can really go down into the depths if you want, but you don't have to. So, hello, Javine. I'm glad you could be here. I hope you've been doing well. You're not really too late. Let me try and get back up to where I was previously. I have a lot of slides in the software here. But I was just telling everybody that I had a little bit of an epiphany with how I want to discuss the BTS universe concept, and how I don't want to focus quite so much on like unpacking a cohesive storyline, and like I just find it way less satisfying to try and answer the BU than to just talk and theorize about the BU. So I was just letting everybody know that like my analysis kind of changed throughout studying up for this live stream and trying to make things for this live stream. I kind of went in a very different direction, so I was just explaining that. Oh, thank you, Butterfly Young. I'm so glad that you enjoyed the iceberg. I had a lot of fun making that. It was a blast to kind of start putting things on, and when I was researching for that live stream a couple months back, I think back in like November or whenever it was, it was fun to like be going through and keep adding and then moving things around on the iceberg and be like, oh, maybe this should be higher, this should be lower, and I probably even could have put more stuff on there, but I'm so glad you liked it. Whoops, sorry, back to some of the old slides from the last time. Let me get back up to those new slides from today. So anyway, all of that to say that today my analysis is going to be a little bit more context heavy for the BU. And not like I'm not going to be, going into everything. But for me, I think it's way more interesting to analyze the BU, not just from the plotline standpoint, but from the standpoint of the very real things that the boys were going through and the things that shaped, the ideas and the context going into the BU. So let me dive right in. So before we get to the actual BU itself, I want to talk about before the BU, because I feel like a lot of what we got in BTS's early, first premiered years, their first debuted years, the things that we get in the school era, I think make set up a lot of what we're going to talk about with the BU and make the BU make a lot of sense, because this is the BU, but what is this? And I think in order to understand this, you have to start back a little bit further. So I have a couple of things that I pulled in primarily from Too Cool for School and Oh Are You Late Too, just because I think that the early school era albums were a little bit more saturated in these themes than like the later school era. Not to say that the later school era wasn't, because we still have great songs like Tomorrow off of School Love Affair and things like that. So we still have like a lot of songs that cover this, but I wanted to focus specifically on Too Cool for School and Oh Are You Late Too. And I pulled out a couple of different like quotes and lyrics from that era that I think really, really set the tone super well for what we see in the BU. So for over in Too Cool for School, we have a bunch of stuff from No More Dream. The first quote is actually from the No More Dream like teaser trailer narration, and that quote it's said by Namjoon as the teaser's playing out, and the quote is, "Life is a zoo and a jungle. We got to find and get our weapons to rumble. So I'm going to fight against all the prejudice, fight for my generation, fight for my music, because this cold world has no more dream." And of course, No More Dream, the song, is about what happens when people force you to have, goals that are not your own. And so that's very much, they're encouraging people to break out of that limitation. So some of the lyrics that really jumped out at me thinking about the BU are, "Growing tired of the same day, every day just repeats. Adults and parents inject you with rigid conventional dreams. Rebel against a hellish society. For once, try being the subject of your life." And another line in No More Dream of, "Don't know how to live, don't know how to take flight, don't know how to make decisions. Now we don't even know how to dream." And it's kind of interesting that flight is used in that, because then we get so much flight and, stuff in wings. So Oh, no worries at all. Don't feed the bears. And yeah, I agree, Metaloop. I like the symbolic, not so concrete stuff as well. Absolutely, I agree. I'm glad you guys agree with me on that. Um, yeah, Butterfly Young, you're so right. The school trilogy kind of gives us the like kind of the ideas of what I think led to those feelings of desperation that we see in the BU, and I think that's especially true in Oh Are You Late Too. So I pulled out two quotes from No and one quote from the intro to the album. So for intro, Oh Are You Late Too? The quote is, "Nothing lasts forever. You only live once, so live your life, not any other's lives. Take chances and never regret. Never, never be late to do what you want to do right now, because at one point of someday, everything you did would be exactly what you will be." And then in No, we have adults confess. They say we have it really easy. They say we're happier than we deserve to be. Well, then what's up with me? I'm still unhappy. The world outside is overflowing with kids like me, the exact same lives as puppets. Who is going to take responsibility? And then the other line from No, which is like the repeated refrain, is, "The adults tell me that things are only hard right now. Just bear it a little longer. Do other things later. Everybody say no. Later doesn't work anymore. Don't keep living a life trapped in someone else's dream." And even though, of course, these are all very focused on young people in school settings being, controlled by like their parents and the adults in their lives, I do think a lot of these sentiments work even outside of a school setting. If you just shift the narrative a little bit and you look at it as being controlled by other things, if you can view it as like being controlled by society at large, or being controlled by other things in life. And I think, kind of in some ways, a lot of Jungi's August D work kind of reminds me of the same energy as the early school era. He just shifts it to, more adult concerns and shifts it to like a more bird's eye view of society instead of just like this specific thing. But something that has always really struck me, and any of you who watched the fan-made documentary series Rise of Bangtan will probably remember this as well. There's a scene in Rise of Bangtan where they're playing these, like these lines from No and these scenes from No over top of actual Korean school students talking about their hardships. And one quote I actually found out comes from a documentary called Permission to Exist, which it looks like came out in 2019, but it looks like the filmmaker was working on it for a lot longer, so it probably would have been being worked on around the time that BTS was actually even releasing Oh Are You Late Too? And the quote from one of the the students who was interviewed as part of that documentary is, "Will that happiness come true? Is that really the reality? What if it's just a false dream, a delusion, and we're all just running towards that delusion?" And I feel like, that's part of what gives the early school era that additional context for me, is like seeing those very real students struggling with these very real problems, and knowing how much a message like what BTS were putting forth in songs like No or No More Dream or any of those others, what those messages must have meant to people and how those must have resonated with people at the time. And so that to me, as somebody who loves context, me in context, I love hearing those things because they give it this real world element of kind of BTS speaking truth to power and living up to their name of, the Bulletproof Boy Scouts, who are going to take the bullets and the prejudice and the pain away from, the people that they view as suffering. So I think there's like a really interesting foundation of, kind of looking at societal problems that then I think when we jump into the BU with that context from the school era, I think a lot of this starts to really gel. So another sort of transformative thing that I had when I was I wasn't actually even researching for this live yet, but in between our last live about the BTS universe and this one, I actually encountered a video, and it's so funny because it wasn't about anything related to BTS whatsoever. It wasn't even I wasn't even expecting it to be an analysis heavy video. It was something totally different, and it really just shifted my thinking to talking about what this is rather than why this is. So that really influenced my thinking too. Thank you, Sonia. I'm glad you liked those lyrics. Yeah, there were so many that I could have picked, but just, I was just thinking about what were some of the most overt like in your face direct mentions of, because I'll give you a little preview of the next slide where I'm kind of unpacking what I think the BU is about. And like, for me, there are three things of the HYYH era BU things, and it's the boys against the rest of the world, society being cruel and apathetic, and societal subversion. And so for me, I was thinking, that immediately puts me in mind of the early school era, and just, pushing back against what, and like, I wanted to take that out of the theory, kind of the, just like the vibe realm of like, oh yes, we're just showing that in the videos, and like pulling that back into the real world of like, well, what's the apathetic society that they were, critiquing at the time? And at the time it was, this one. So, and rebel against this hellish society and things like that. I love that so much. That is such a good description. Army Theorist Corner and Friends. I think like that should be our official live stream name. ATC and Friends. The meeting of the Board of Friends has come to pass. And I'm so glad that you all are enjoying, just like on your Sunday afternoon, that you enjoy getting some brain tingling. It's a lot of fun. So let me jump back down to this slide of what is this. So that video that I mentioned that I watched that kind of changed, how I think about this type of analysis, that was non-BTS related. Of all the things, it was actually about the TV show Stranger Things. I've been consuming a lot of like analysis and stuff about Stranger Things since the series has come to an end. And I was just watching a video by somebody who was talking about how the kind of, if you're not familiar with Stranger Things, there's like an alternate realm in that series that's called the Upside Down. And it's kind of like the real world, but it's like very scary. It's like this wild, full of monsters, very creepy alternate version of this place. So I was watching this, the guy who made this video was talking about like why that concept worked so well in the first season of the show. And he was actually talking about how in order to understand that concept, you also had to understand like why the show takes place in the 80s and why it can only take place in the 80s and not any other time period. And it was just really, really interesting because his whole philosophy was about not asking why the show takes place in the 80s, but asking like what are the 80s as portrayed by the show and how that lends itself to all the plots. And it was just a really, really fascinating video. And I was kind of already in this headspace of thinking about the BU and getting ready to prep for this live stream, and I grabbed onto it and was just immediately like, that is how I want to think about the BU when we all talk about it together. So I actually wrote down one of his quotes from his videos because I just loved it. World building perfectly maps onto emotional experience and gives form to real feelings that we have about our lives and our world. And I just thought that reminded me so much of how the BU was influenced by BTS's real feelings. So that kind of started me down some of this analytical rabbit hole as well, in addition to kind of realizing I didn't, actually want to talk about the storyline so much, but, kind of that pushed me down the analytical rabbit hole as well. Yeah, I agree, Sonia. And kind of like I said, I think that's why like the BU and some of its energy still fits even when BTS aren't teenagers anymore, even as they get older, because there's always like something that you can be describing and critiquing. And, again, going back to like Yoongi Zaga's D work, for instance, and just, I think of Hegum, a song like Hegum when he's, talking about like, slaves to YouTube and slaves to flexing and slaves to capitalism and, slaves to trying to make money and look cool and, things like that. And, that's something that you can relate to at so many different ages, and when BTS was specifically talking about the school system in their early school era stuff, I think you can even zoom out from that a little bit and say, this isn't just a conversation about the school system. This is a conversation about all sorts of expectations. This is a conversation about people who want to hijack other people's lives and tell them how to live, and so you can very much take the idea of, well, this is specifically aimed towards school era, like school age people listening to this music, and zoom out from it and say, this is made to speak to anybody who is having their life controlled by somebody else, and who is coming up against the friction of people wanting them to live a different life. Like the line in No, don't keep living a life trapped in someone else's dream. That doesn't just have to relate to somebody who is school aged, and like that can speak to anybody at any stage of their life in any type of situation. And so I love that there's sort of a universality to this, even though it's specifically talking about the Korean school system. So exactly like you said, Sonia, it's part of why BTS's music resonates with so many people, and why even their older stuff continues to resonate, and it's not just, I think it would be very easy to look at something like, we're going back to their very first, song when they first debuted, No More Dream, and it would be so easy to look at that as like, that's a 13-year-old song and look at it as a product of its time. But, I think it's great. So where was I? Let's jump down to here. So this slide that I showed for you before. So I believe at the core of kind of all of these concepts, the boys against the rest of the world, a cruel and apathetic society, and social subversion, at the core of that is, of course, youth. And, we know that the BU is about youth. We know that HYYH is about youth, but I think that youth is the core, and then these things sort of grow out of it. So we have all of these, like what we see of just the friendship and camaraderie that they share, and the understanding that they find with each other within these videos, and within this part of the BU, and how together they sort of are rejecting societal problems and creating a new world with each other, where they, kind of can have full self-expression. And I just think it's so interesting to how much they show that the world is just cruel and apathetic, through these videos. And then they show them rebelling against that. And again, rebel against this hellish society from No More Dream. And I think it just raises some really interesting questions about, like, if the society is cruel and you rebel against it, is that really rebellion, or is that just so, resistance? Are you just kind of pushing back against, a world that is bad and should change, So I think there's a lot of interesting, even though the videos like Run and I Need You are just kind of like have this vibe of just like the boys going and running around and doing their own thing and dealing with hardship and, dealing with the most beautiful moment in life and the dark and light side of that. It just kind of has that vibe. There's like this undercurrent of, I think, a lot of questions that you can ask about the world when you look at what's happening. So all of that, all of my descriptions, all of my sort of mapping all this out kind of leads to my understanding of the BU. This is the end result of all of my thinking and my epiphany. And so for me, and kind of like a lot of this analysis that I'm pulling, like that inspired me from that other video and things like that. So the BU could take place anywhere and be about anything. But because it functions in these specific ways, I believe it helps us understand the displacement of youth, the apathy of the world, and the journeys of young people first encountering the fundamental problems of society. There is something both tragic and beautiful about youth. It's wild and free, but also deeply limiting. Young people feel both the expectations and limitations of the world and long to rebel against the things that would otherwise hold them back from discovering their true selves and their identities. And I think that is the through line for me of the entire BU. And so when I analyze it, I'm a little bit less concerned with the things that happen and more of like what's actually going on behind the scenes. So that is my understanding of the BU, and we'll go through and we'll be looking at like, you know, some of how the BU changes in Wings and how it changes in the Love Yourself era. But I would love to hear some of your thoughts as well. Just like as you've been sharing in the chat, I've kind of been loving, you know, your thoughts about seeing it as very symbolic as well. I didn't want to disappoint anybody today by like selling this like I was gonna be really doing a lot of theorizing. Like I didn't want anybody to think that I was gonna be like telling you the exact here's what happens here and there and in this video and that video. So I'm glad you a lot of you seem to also agree that it's more fun to just keep it in like the symbolism world. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of everything we have going on in this part of the BTS universe. And I know some of you said that you are kind of just lurking right now, which is fine. No worries at all. But for any of you who are still in the chat, yeah, let me know your thoughts. Javine, yeah, no, that is so valid and understandable. I think it's very easy to feel lost in the BU, and as I said in like the previous live stream where we were discussing it, I think it's meant to be confusing on purpose. You know, there was a desire with the BU to keep people coming back and, you know, engaging with it. So of course you have to kind of make it a little bit complicated in order to encourage people to keep engaging with it, you know? So it's so valid to still feel lost. I think there's a lot that goes into how they put it together. And there's kind of like a meta level and a non-meta level. And so it's kind of interesting like that. Thank you, Sonia. I'm so glad that you kind of like my thoughts about it. And yeah, I agree. It's just like the universalness and the ideas that it can spawn. You know, there's so many complicated thoughts you can have about the BU and like a lot of depth. Butterfly Young, I love that. I love that idea of just like, you know, with friends you can distract yourselves and survive. And I think that really does fit with a lot of this. It's like the worst parts of the BU are when they are alone, and the best parts of the BU are when they're together, which is really interesting to me. Yeah, we give each other hope. I like that a lot. And you know, I think it's funny to me, you know, I always wonder how much of the BU was planned in advance and how much just kind of evolved and grew with BTS, you know, because like I said, there are a lot of things and a lot of references in the different videos that kind of do, excuse me, that do need to be explained through like that further continuing storyline. But when did that storyline really start to get extra layers added to it? Because as far as I'm concerned, even before you get into the Wings stuff and the Love Yourself era stuff, there's still so much complexity that you can wring out of just I Need You and Run and like the HYYH on stage prologue film. You know, like there's still so much depth that you can find within those things. And it's just funny to think that the BU gets even more complex, because I already think it's quite complex here. Like even just with these, you know, it sounds on the face of it saying that these videos are about 7 boys who go up against a cruel and apathetic society by subverting that society's expectations and being with each other. That's a really, really basic definition, but there's so much to unpack just in even that very simple idea. And I just feel like, to me, to my mind, it brings up a lot of questions of like, if the society is cruel, you know, are you really actually, you know, are you resisting and defying it? Like, is that a bad thing? If the society is cruel, if you are rejecting societal problems, you know, like what is your obligation to fit into a society that is bad and that has these problems, you know. And in some ways I feel like they're almost saying like maybe in that sense it's your duty to go against what it says, which is again a very interesting concept when you consider all of the things that they were talking about in the school era. So, you know, there's a lot of depth and things to that. And of course the BU is also about like that transition from, you know, childhood into adulthood. It's, you know, kind of about that uncomfortable, uncertain feeling of adolescence. So that adds an extra layer there too. So there's so much to unpack just in the, you know, just in like Run and I Need You. I'm sure I don't really need to like continue to belabor the point, but there's some interesting things from beyond the story about the BU and about like I Need You and stuff. I'm not gonna, there's like a lot on this screen, so I'm not gonna read out everything. Of course, this, like all my other lives, will be up on the channel to watch afterwards. So if you'd like to see any of like the quotes that I selected from beyond the story, you can always come back and like pause the screen and read this. I'm just gonna read like the parts that I sort of bolded that really jumped out at me, which was talking about HYH part 1. The book says the members pouring out their most private emotions is like what led to this being created. Talk about how the Most Beautiful in Life series came out of the most private confessions. It talked about how it was like storytelling that relied on the personal experiences and emotions of the members providing the foundation. And one of my personal favorites, because you all know I love liminal space, is the description of BTS were lingering on the outskirts, trapped between their uncertain position and a longing for success. I apologize for getting tongue-tied. But all of that is talking about how BTS at the time were in this precarious position, as, you know, they had kind of had some success. If you read beyond the story or like see some of their interviews that they've talked about, sort of like that school era vibe where they had success and then they would struggle and then they had success and they would struggle. They call it the sweet bitter period, you know. So they had kind of had some success, but they'd also kind of had some setbacks. And as they were coming into, you know, the Most Beautiful Moment in Life series with part 1 and 2, they were really feeling that sense of desperation because they were kind of successful, but kind of still struggling, you know? And so that emotion and like the desperation that they felt at that time and the way people treated them at that time also goes into a lot of the BU. Oh, you're so welcome, Hitchhiker Hobbit. I'm glad that you were here for part of it, and I hope you get to catch up on the rest of it later. Thank you for being here, and I hope to see you on Discord again soon. So have a good rest of your day. All right, so another thing I'm sure I probably don't really need to like belabor the point on is like the HYYH era videos that sort of kicked the BU off, but I have them here just, you know, to go over them. We have, of course, I Need You, the music video for I Need You. We have the HYYH on stage prologue film, which is just kind of a longer, you know, very symbolic, very storyline heavy video, but not a music video. Then we have the music video for Run, the music video for Epilogue Young Forever, and then the Japanese versions of I Need You and Run, of course. Butterfly Young, yeah, I love that description. And I remember when I was doing some research for the previous BU live stream that I did, I remember they were talking about how you can almost look, and this came from the members themselves, they were talking about how you can almost look at I Need You as happiness. How did they put it? I think it was I Need You was like happiness underneath the sadness, and Run was sadness over top of the happiness, which I thought was really interesting. And I think you can actually, if you watch the videos with that in mind, you can actually really get that sense, because I Need You, the video for I Need You is very, very sad, but then kind of underneath there are these happy moments that they spend together, versus Run, which is like very happy and energetic moments where they're all together and running, but then also undercut by these much sadder, ideas and elements. It goes from them all partying together to then just like Jungkook by himself, or like, everybody's happy together, but then like that scene where JK's character and Yoongi's character are like, fighting and things like that. And you just have these really great, energetic, upbeat moments undercut with like these really dark and sad moments. It's kind of interesting. So those are my thoughts specifically about the Most Beautiful Moment in Life era, and how it picks up where the school era leaves off, how it kind of pulls in all of those ideas and thoughts. And then, of course, we go into Wings, which is when, the BU kind of started changing shape a little bit. We start getting like a very, kind of supernatural, decadent, we really get a lot of the mind games and the mind bending of the BU really starts to take full root here in the Wings era. So I wanted to kind of explore what some of this says about not just the BU and BTS's journey, but like, what does this say in general? So of course we know that the kind of the main through point of the Wings era is the idea of temptation. And I think in it we can also see kind of dovetailing with Seven Boys Against the Rest of the World. They're together, they're experiencing the camaraderie and friendship of youth. And then we jump out down into Wings and we're looking at kind of the end of innocence. It's the period of adolescence in which you're first coming up against the things that want to pull you off of the path. And that, of course, leads to a lot of pain as you grow and are reborn and you experience an uncertain future. And, of course, good and evil. There's a lot of interesting, they use good and evil almost in that sense, like the biblical sense of like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and things like that. They use it in that sense. But I think they also just use it in the sense of, as you get older and as you go through your life, you are tempted to either make good decisions or bad decisions. It kind of marks your transition into adulthood and your growth and everything to kind of figure out where you fall on that scale. And I think this opens up a lot of really interesting questions to me, and just, still pulling those elements from the BU, those characters from the BU, and asking questions about them and what are they tempted to do and be, and kind of what does society push them towards, I think is a really interesting discussion to have as well. And that's something that I'm always very interested in my own analysis, and something that I'm always very drawn to in stories as well, is the idea. And it actually reminds me a little bit, jumping into solo work, it reminds me of something that J-Hope actually says in Jack in the Box, in the song There Are No Bad People in the World, or Stop, where he sort of talks about like, can you really judge somebody as evil if you don't know their circumstances? And that message really resonates with me, because it's like the question of, are there actually good and bad people, or is it just people? Yoongi says something similar in his song People off of D2. Am I a good person? Am I a bad person? There are too many ways to judge. I'm just a person. And I think there's, the question of like, can you discount somebody as just evil and write them off if you don't know their story and what society has done to them and pushed them to? V says something similar in Beyond the Story, where he talks about his character in the BU, and he says he always pities that character because he feels like his character had no choice but to become evil, and I just think that's really interesting when you consider the situation that character is in, and you think about the idea of like, okay, this is what the situation that life has put you in, and you have, do you have no choice but to become evil? Is that the only thing that is available to you? It just raises a lot of really interesting questions, I think. And of course, the specific Wings era videos that are BU related are the Wings short films, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and then the Japanese version of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Those are where we get our most, BTS universe themes. Even though it's not of the BTS universe, it's kind of in its own sort of world and has its own sort of vibes. I do also, on some level, think that Spring Day could kind of sync up with a lot of these thoughts as well, because Spring Day is also very much about, society and the apathy towards suffering and those feelings of Han. So even though it's not a BU video, I also feel like Spring Day kind of sits at the same table. Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Sonia. I do feel like a lot of the solo work has either echoes of it or, brings those ideas back, and sometimes it's overt, like something like Jimin's song Smeralda Garden Marching Band, obviously borrows from the Smeralda Flower part of the BU, but like you just said, there's a lot of like full circle moments and evolutions of thoughts too, which is really cool. D-Style, yeah, I think I remember that clip. And it's so funny because if you watch J-Hope's interviews about Jack in the Box, he says that that song was born out of a conversation that he had with a friend who disagreed with him. And immediately when I saw that clip, I'm like, I wonder if that was a conversation between him and Namjoon. Just because it definitely sounds like a conversation that they would have. And it's, again, I love that that brings up like so many things to discuss, and just, of sort of figuring out, like what position that you feel. And, that is just, I love the way that that work can create those thoughts and just like have those conversations, and, I think that's something that's really interesting about the way they portray this part of the BU in Wings, because you do have that ability to question of like, what is inherently good, what is inherently bad, do those concepts exist, like what is good and evil, and just I think that is so cool that we can really dive into what we think about those concepts, because those concepts, they seem like they would just be very easy, but they're not. There's a lot of depth that goes into even just the idea of defining good and evil, and I think it's so fascinating that we can use those and pull from our own experiences and pull from the boys' thoughts and how their thoughts shape what they do in this series, and it's such an interesting thing to me. And I'm so curious to hear. I know we've talked about Wings like in a previous live stream, and we really were diving deep into a lot of the themes and stuff of Wings, and we talked a little bit about the BU connections in that live stream as well. But I'm so curious if there's any other things that you guys kind of like that jump out at you with Wings, and what it says about the BU, what it says about these themes. I'm so curious if you have any other thoughts. I love all the thoughts in the chat. You all have such good observations. And of course, as we move out of Wings, we also are going to move into the Love Yourself series, which again, we also just recently talked about on live stream. That was my previous live stream before this one, just talking about what makes, the idea of the Love Yourself series so special. So this one's a little bit even more fresh in our minds, but as we transition out of Wings, we get into Love Yourself and the final shift in the BU and what that means. So I'd also love to hear your thoughts and theories about that. For me, of course, obviously, it's a little bit of a cheat to say that the Love Yourself series has a main theme of self-love. We, of course, know that, but I think kind of going back to what I was discussing in the Love Yourself specific live stream, I think it gives us this idea that self-love is true love. And part of embracing that is, embracing your growth and evolution, letting go of pain, and then, you're rejecting that fake love and you're coming to believe in real love. And in many cases, they're saying that self-love being true love is an essential component of that. So, it is an interesting change in the BU when you kind of go from a lot of that pain and uncertainty and you kind of come to the idea of like, what is the answer to that pain and uncertainty? The idea of self-love. And I think that's really interesting too. And so that really evolves the narrative in really interesting ways as well. And of course, the Love Yourself era videos that, really center on the BU and its themes are the video for Euphoria, the Love Yourself highlight reel, Fake Love, and Epiphany. Something else that I wanted to bring up, this is a previous slide from when I had previously discussed the BTS universe, but while we discussed sort of like the idea of the meanings and the theories, I did also want to bring back this idea of where, like why the BTS universe was made, what it is, where it came from. And I always just love this quote from RM of there are characters, 7 different characters in the video, so we try to not be so far away from our real characteristics and our real life. We're always discussing our experiences, our hardships, and our sadness, and that really helps in coming up with the characters in the videos. And that is in an article that the title of which also quotes RM, which is "We write about things people don't want to say." And I just think that that is also such a huge component of the entire BTS universe concept. Right, Sonia? Yes, I agree so much. The idea of self-love is in some ways, and I mentioned this in the last live stream, in some ways it's kind of funny that I've always for a long, like ever since I kind of was an ARMY and started embracing like the BTS version of self-love, I've really come to think that self-love is kind of in some sense like radical, and it's like very subversive. And so it kind of is funny that it links back up to the societal subversion that we see in the not only the early HYYH era, but in the school era, all about rebelling against society. And here in Love Yourself, we still have a form of rebelling against society, but it's just rebelling against society by loving yourself, which I think is a really interesting idea that, there's still this revolutionary radical notion, but instead it's now just the act of, rejecting fake love and believing in yourself and appreciating and accepting your own self instead of, and it goes back to kind of what they were already saying in the school era, as early as the school era, of live your own life, not anybody else's life. Don't be trapped in what they want for you. And then we come to love yourself. So it's kind of, it was a through line all the time, even when it wasn't overtly said. Yeah, don't feed the bears. I like that. Yeah, that description of just, like losing yourself. I always think of singularity, and there's a line in singularity about I put on the mask for you, and then it's did I lose myself or did I gain you? And I just think that line is just so chilling of just like, what do you gain at the end of the day if you've got the approval of other people, but you don't have your own self and you don't know your own self, which perfectly dovetails with the messages of the early school era again. And we also have that same idea in Epiphany of just like, the self that you really are underneath the mask that you put on for people, and it's just such an interesting way of looking at how the world kind of forces you, the world and society force you to wear a mask as you go and grow and change, and in some ways too, if you want to link it back to Wings, I think some of the temptation that Wings discusses and, the end of innocence and the temptation of good and evil is giving up your own self, for other people and to just make it through, so there's part of that temptation in addition to just like the temptation to step off the path and be bad. I think there's also this temptation to step off the path and just lose yourself and lose who you are. And that's part of the, the fear and discomfort of adolescence and the way adolescence sort of forces you into the uncertain future is it calls into question your perception of yourself. And so in so many ways, Wings is kind of like this perfect, I've said this before, Wings is like the perfect middle ground and the bridge. And I think Wings so beautifully bridges things like the early school era and HYYH with later things like Love Yourself and Map of the Soul, both Love Yourself and Mott's are very much about like self-actualization. And Wings, I think, really beautifully sets those things up by kind of pulling it out of the realm of, the rebellious adolescence and into more of the kind of the quiet self-revolution of self-love. It's a really interesting, and it's so interesting to me that all three of those eras are so heavily saturated in the BTS universe because I think they all sort of build off of one another so well. Yes, that's so true, T-Style, and that's something that that kind of almost takes me back to like what I sort of said in my Pied Piper video of how people who don't understand BTS just assume, that it's like wasting your life listening to, this boy band, blah 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 blah, and a lot of people who don't get it don't understand that kind of surrendering yourself over to this music is actually about like the process of self-discovery. And I think that's why so many people are drawn to what BTS has to say, and part of why, returning to our earlier discussion about like Arirang and things like that, that's part of why I hope that we still get that type of energy in Arirang, because I think there are so many important messages that only BTS is able to deliver. And I know that sounds weird, to say only BTS can deliver these messages, because of course that's not necessarily true on the face of it, but in my experience, I think only BTS has delivered a lot of these messages. I always say it's really interesting to me that I, as a woman, that like some of the truest self-love and encouragement to express and experience self-love that I've experienced as a woman is from 7 Korean men. Like, and that's really interesting that it's just, that is such an unusual, unexpected thing, and their message resonated with me so deeply in a way that not many other things ever did. And how unique and special that is. So I know I moved through all of that a little bit fast, especially Wings and Love Yourself. But I also wanted to just bring it back to that realm of BTS Universe Theories, since I'm talking a little bit of like more on a meta level of what went into these albums and things. So I didn't want to divert too much from the idea of theories. You've heard my idea of how I'm theorizing and analyzing the BU. I would love to hear, if you guys have any other thoughts about how you do it, or if you had anything that you specifically wanted to pin me down on, because I know I was sort of like, oh, I'm not going to be talking too much about like the plot line or the symbols or this, that, or the other thing. But if there was anything that you wanted me to discuss that I haven't discussed in previous live streams, like any symbols or anything, I didn't want to get too far away from that. So please do let me know if there's like a symbol specifically that jumped out at you that you want to discuss. And I still have all of my slides from my previous BTS Universe live stream still in the software. So if there's anything that you remember from like a previous conversation that you want to talk about symbol wise or anything like that, I probably still have it in here. So we can also kind of take that more bird's eye view of the actual symbols of the BU, and we can still get into the nitty gritty of theories, even though I'm sort of rejecting the idea of like analyzing the full plot line. We can still get into the nitty gritty of those symbols and things. I don't want you to think I'm like shutting that down, because I'm totally not. I figure I'll still be on for about another probably like 45 minutes or so. Usually I like to keep the streams at, in the realm of like 2 hours. So we still have plenty of time to discuss anything if there's anything you specifically wanted me to zero in on. And I'm also curious, because we've mentioned this in previous live streams as well. We've talked about kind of our belief that a lot of us are of the opinion that the BU probably is going to come back around in some way, shape, or form. We're expecting to maybe even see some of its elements in Arirang. So I'd be very curious to hear, how you guys maybe either want the BU to show back up or how you think the BU might show back up. Yeah, so let me jump down to the slide with the storyline for Jimin. So I think there's two ways of looking at this storyline, and one is, of course, the very plotline focused idea, which that's part of why I use Jimin's character as an example, because I think Jimin's character kind of doesn't make a lot of sense unless you actually look at this plot line, which talks about the idea of like, oh, he witnessed something terrible as a child and like it still haunts him, and like all of that element that you get from like the Save Me webtoon and from BTS Universe Story, the game. So I do think on some sense a lot of that makes sense for his character and that explains his character. But for me, I always am analyzing Jimin's things in the BU as coming from that imposter syndrome sort of element that I talked about when I did my video for the Macnays for the Welcome Home BTS series. And I just, for me, like when you look at a song like Lie, that's where my mind goes to right away. The idea of feeling like you will always get found out and somebody's always going to come along and say, you actually don't belong here, get out, because that's what imposter syndrome is. Imposter syndrome is like that feeling that you are just faking it. You have nothing to back it up. And someday somebody's going to come along and figure out that you are in essence lying, and so I've always analyzed Jimin's character through that lens of just thinking that, and I think you can see it in the Love Yourself highlight reel of just, he's desperately trying to dance and do better and practicing and things like that. And I think you can see it in the Lie short film of just, there's a camera in his face in that short film, and just that very much feels like the idea of being watched and questioned and put on the spot of just can you actually do this? So that's very much kind of what I see in Jimin's character. I'd be really curious to think, hear what some of the rest of you think as well. If, you have other explanations for Jimin's character and some of the other characters in the BU that are kind of confusing. So Sonia said, Arirang is going to touch on forms of love. How do you think that could connect to the BU? Yeah. So I think it's really interesting that when BTS did that sort of what is your love song promotion, I found it really interesting and refreshing that the love that ARMY seemed to pick most of all was self-love, which is, like we were saying, that's what a lot of us associate with BTS. And I personally think and hope and theorize that Arirang is going to be about the idea of journeying, because Arirang as a folk song is very much about going on a journey, and I think it would really fit for where BTS are at right now in their lives and in their careers, of the idea of returning from a journey. I think we were already seeing some of those themes in Map of the Soul as well, the idea of BTS as these constant eternal wanderers, and I think that there could be a lot of ways to express love within that framework. I think you could say they could be talking about the love of ARMY, returning after that journey is a form of the love they have for ARMY. That very much makes me think of the song Make It Right off of Map of the Soul. I think they could still talk about self-love, absolutely. And I think the BU deals with a lot of love as far as friendship goes, the love of togetherness and the love of each other as comrades and brothers and things like that. And in some senses, even I think there's a love of the world too, of just loving the people who have no voice and loving the people who struggle within a world that doesn't love them back, and I think all of those things really make sense for BTS right now. And I think all of those could, be kind of a part of that, you know what I mean? I think all of those kind of have a very BU sort of energy that could be expressed. Yeah, exactly. The idea of BTS and ARMY side by side, on this journey, kind of running together, walking together, goes back to You Never Walk Alone. I do just feel like the BU highlights how the boys are better when they're together. In the pictures that, I have here, there always seems to be a thing, bad things happen when they're alone, good things happen when they're together. Not all the time. That doesn't, of course, hold entirely. RM and V's character get arrested together. So it's not always, it's not always great when even when they're together. That doesn't always change things. But I think the happiest times that are shown are when they are with each other, just enjoying life and being together and having that camaraderie. And to me, I just feel like that is BTS and ARMY. We're better when we're together and enjoying each other's camaraderie and company. And that is when we feel the most understood and when we can do the most good. And I think it would be very easy to take that idea and adapt it for Arirang and potentially even adapt those same thoughts of the BU. It is interesting because a lot of the BU does sort of have a youthful energy, even even when they evolved, things evolved a lot in Wings and Love Yourself, but it would be interesting to see the BU from that slightly older perspective. Right, T-Style? Better together. And they've said that many times before and have expressed that feeling of, how they feel lonely when they're not all together. We've seen in a lot of the members' solo work, they've still tried to include 7 people. Like JK always had 6 other dancers when he would perform Standing Next to You. Or for Yoongi, the beginning of Haegum shows him when his August D character in that video rolls up to steal the money in Haegum, he is there with a gang of 6 other people, so they're a 7-member gang rolling in. And I think a lot of this, they are so deliberate about how they choose to express themselves as 7. And I think that's very important to them. Something that I wanted to mention earlier too, and I had just kind of forgotten while we were on this screen, but there's something else that I found really interesting, like while I was actually, I wasn't even researching, this just came up and it immediately put me in mind of the BU. I follow a channel that is like a historical cooking channel. So it's like, because I love history. So the guy who runs the channel looks at a period in history or a special like food related circumstance in history, and he'll break down not only the food but the history behind it. And I admit that this is a bit of a reach, because it seems like it was very much more of like an American and European concept than something that they would have really had any type of like, I don't think it would have any meaning to them in Korea. But I could definitely see like Lupin's the video director or anybody involved at Big Hit still kind of being intrigued by this, even though it was more of like a Western phenomenon. But during the late 1800s, early 1900s, like especially around like the Great Depression here in the United States, but beyond that, even in Europe and things like that, there was kind of a rise of young men in particular who just lived like these itinerant lifestyles and would especially like be in trains, like, and they would, that was like their big thing, is like they would ride the rails looking for work. And they formed like a whole subculture of, a lot of times, like they didn't really have homes, they had very tenuous job prospects, they had very little money, and a lot of it reminded me of BTS's characters in like I Need You and I Need You and Run, but especially I Need You, because they're shown on the like down on the train tracks a lot, and it really reminded me of that element of just like displaced young men who are wandering and trying to look for purpose. And it's just very interesting that there is like a historical context to that. Oh, thank you so much, Sonia. I'm so glad you could be here. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you enjoy catching up on it too. I'll see you on Discord soon. Have a great day. T-Style. Yeah, so I don't know if I have a good picture of it. Let me see down in like some of my previous slides down here. Unfortunately, it's kind of small-ish, but you can see it. He is writing it on the mirror in the HYYH on stage prologue film. It's also written in the like when he's in the boxcar in Reflection, it's in the room where Jin is in Awake, and of course it's on the piece of glass that he exchanges in the fake love trailer. From what I've seen online, what it translates out to is like, you must live on or you must survive, and I've also seen people translate it as we must survive. Yeah, exactly. Don't feed the bears. Just like that idea of, like disenfranchisement, which again kind of goes back to the idea of like societal apathy and like, just kind of having to take care of your own self and, fight for your own place in society because like nobody else is going to do it for you. So, you have to try and find your place, and it's, very hard, and it involves like a lot of wandering and suffering. And I think that's kind of an interesting connection to the idea of like their characters sort of wandering alone. And I even was wondering, and I didn't have time to look this up because I never read the books growing up or anything, but it kind of also put me in mind of the idea of the Boxcar Children. The idea of young people who kind of just leave regular life behind and kind of live this sort of alternate strange lifestyle where they kind of experience this degree of freedom, but also like there's kind of a sad element to it because it's like, again, you don't really have a home, you're just sort of wandering and isolated. Yes, yeah, Don't Feed the Bears. And there's a lot of references to Catcher in the Rye scattered throughout things in the BU. I know there's a quote from Catcher in the Rye written on the wall of the motel that Yoongi's in and I Need You. And I remember, is it I forget if it's the motel that Yoongi's in or if it's in like when J-Hope's in the like first scene in the bathroom taking the pills. I forget now. I would have to go back and look because I remember seeing it one time when I was doing some research and like pausing the video and trying to figure out what the quote was from. And then I know there's a quote in, um, oh gosh, I think it's the Japanese version of I Need You, if I'm not mistaken. There's a quote on the wall that's also from Catcher in the Rye, and I believe it's like the mark of the immature man is that he wants to die for a cause, and the mark of a mature man is that he wants to live nobly for one. And so there's a couple of little Catcher in the Rye references sort of spread throughout the BU, which makes a ton of sense, in terms of being another story about kind of like a wandering, young person who's like looking for their purpose. That's a very universal theme, I think, amongst all young people and people who go through any type of transition in life. We love to talk about liminal space and liminality on this channel, and I something that I think I'm really drawn to about liminality is that it never truly stops. Like, it's not just a thing that young people experience, it's a thing that people experience at various times in their lives. And I think the BU really gets to the core of liminality really, really well and really portrays those feelings of transition and displacement and uncertainty in ways that not a lot of other media that I've seen really manages to capture. Yeah, Taste Out. To be honest, I never actually read it. Like, it was never something that was like required reading for me in school or anything like that. Something that I'm definitely trying to do in my adulthood is go back and read some of the classics that I've never had a chance to experience. And for me, I think, in my own experience at least, I've really had a lot of luck with going back and listening to classics in audiobook form, because sometimes, yeah, I do think like great stories can be lost sometimes in being a little bit dry, like description wise. But like they're great stories, and I think it helps when you are listening to them rather than reading. So I would love to do Catcher in the Rye. I've even thought about wondering because I want to do book club here on the channel and do book club live streams. And I even thought it like there are so many books that even if they're not directly related to BTS, they're tangentially related to BTS. And it's like it'd be fun to kind of explore some of those. I do definitely recommend Damien though, and I know I've talked about that in a couple of different live streams. But because Damien is so central to Wings, and like so much of Wings draws inspiration from Damien, I highly recommend that one. And that one was so much better than I was thinking, because I was thinking it might be a bit of a dry classic, but Damien is actually really good. I really enjoyed that one. Yeah, Tisa, I'd love to hear what you think about it. I'm actually looking, as we speak, I'm looking to see if it's on Audible, because sometimes Audible has the classics for free. So I'm curious now. Yeah, no, I definitely recommend Damien. Damien's really good. Oh, interesting. It looks like, for some strange reason, it looks like Audible doesn't have Catcher in the Rye. The only thing I can think is that I know that The Catcher in the Rye is a little bit of a controversial book, because I know that sometimes people who would go out and do very terrible things would like cite it as like their inspiration. And so maybe Audible just keeps it off because of that. But I'll also check, a lot of local libraries also do audiobooks as well. So I might check that out and see if they have an audio version. Yeah, you're so right. Don't feed the bears. There are unfortunately a lot of novels, both classic and otherwise, that are long but don't have a lot of substance behind them. So, were there any other things that maybe I didn't cover as we talked about the BU today, that maybe you were really interested about going into this live stream, or just like lingering thoughts that you have that you'd love to touch on together? I'm so curious what you all think. This has been awesome. You guys have had like such good observations, as always. You always do. In the live chat, like I said earlier, I was so worried that when I came on and was like, "Hey, so I don't actually want to talk about the storyline of the BU. I just want to talk about symbolism and vibes." That it would be a bit of like a disappointing live stream. So I'm so glad that it wasn't. And I'm so glad that you all have been like really into what I've been saying and how I've structured the live stream today. That makes me really happy. Oh, thank you, Don't Feed the Bears. I'm so glad. Yeah, because I had even been, I had been in the process of like prepping slides to basically break down like some of the more important videos of the BU, like talking about, like, for instance, I had started on I Need You, of course, because that's where we first get the BU, and it was literally like breaking down the basic plot elements and like what each of the characters is doing and like blah blah blah. And I was like halfway through doing that when I was like, I think I need to pivot. Like, I think I just need to completely change how I'm talking about this. So I'm glad it worked out. But, and thank you, Metaloop. I'm so glad. T Style, do you think we will revisit it? PD Bang hinted we would, but as we get closer to things, it seems less likely. So, yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. Because like we were just talking about before, I think there are so many themes of the BU that could so effortlessly get put into Arirang. And I think the great thing about the BU is that it's really adaptable. You know, we see, even though it kind of didn't officially start until The Most Beautiful Moment in Life, I think we see elements of it in the school era even so. I know that one of the BU elements, like one of the BU related things, is actually even like VCRs from the Red Bullet Tour, which still kind of have that school era energy. So it kind of is able to adapt from the school era to HYYH, to Wings, to Love Yourself. And so I think it could easily adapt and be Arirang, you know, and just show those characters older and those ideas a little bit more evolved and developed. So I do still think that we could get BU elements. And I think that's actually on my bingo card for Arirang, is that we will get some sort of BU element. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially because we never actually did get a project for the 10th anniversary. So maybe they decided to put it into Arirang instead. But I also could see a world where we don't get anything BU related, where they think that, you know, because there is so much in the BU that does really fit when they are like the displaced wandering youth, you know, and a lot of stuff that makes sense within that context. So I could see them choosing to not go back into it. And if they just sort of are like, look, we wrapped up that storyline, you have a conclusion to it. But I could very much see a world in which we bring back at least the energy of the BU and the vibes of the BU. Yeah, very true, Metaloop. They've set that up with, you know, they've given us that idea of multiple storylines and alternate storylines for the BU, and I could very much see, you know, that being a thing. I guess, see, for me, because we don't know anything about what we're getting for Arirang, I think it also depends on, we know we're getting a music video at the very least, but how many music videos are we getting? You know, if we're only getting a music video for a title track, then I don't see quite so much of there being like a BU element. If we were maybe getting, let's say, a pre-release track with a music video, you know, I could see that, or I could see some sort of tie-in like the, you know, the Wings short films, you know, or even something like the Love Yourself highlight reel. I could absolutely see that being, you know, put into the mix as well. So I really just wish we had a track list or a timeline of what we're getting for the release, because then I think I could say with more certainty, air quotes around certainty, that like, oh yeah, I'm really feeling the BU elements here, but we have nothing, so it's such a struggle. I would love that, Javine. I hope so. Yeah, I don't know, because it's like when you think of, again, going back to like Mott 7, you had 2 videos for On, 2 videos for Black Swan. Then you had, you know, it's a little bit of a cheat to count Persona because that was from, you know, Map of the Soul Persona, so it had come out previously. Same thing with Boy of Love, but it's like you had those 2 videos, and then you had Shadow and Ego. And then you even, you know, we got like the little animated one for We Are Bulletproof the Eternal. So it's like we got so many videos for Mott 7. So it would be really weird to think that we only got one for Arirang, you know, like that would be really strange. Yeah, that's interesting too, Metaloop. It's interesting to think. something that I always kind of take exception with in a lot of other media and even in a lot of other people's interpretations of things is the way that people choose to define the words adult and maturity. And I would be very interested because I think, at least I hope, that BTS's idea of what adulthood and maturity is, I think, if they are choosing to say something different than what most media says, I think that would be really interesting. And I think it would still actually be very keeping with the BU, of just showing like, how do you look at the problems of society with a more, an eye that has more experience. And I just would be very interested to be like, what are the problems of society that you are addressing now? As people who have gone through a lot more of their careers, as people who have had to go through military service, as people who have experienced a lot more like hatred and discrimination in the music industry than, even than what they were experiencing back then. It's just like, what does that version of the BU look like? And I think that's probably the real reason why I want to see more of the BU, is because I would love to see that same notion of the BU of, breaking out of the limitations of society and addressing those problems. What does that look like in 2026 as opposed to in 2015? So I would be very curious to see if they have thoughts about that, and if so, what those thoughts are. I figure we'll start wrapping things up relatively soon. So if you had any other final thoughts, either about the BU or thoughts in general that you wanted to discuss while we're here today, since we won't be back for another, 2 weeks. If you had anything else you want to discuss today, let me know, as we are kind of in the last, the wrap up stages. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about Arirang in the next live stream. But, any thoughts that you were having today about either that or about the BU, please let me know. I can't believe that, it makes sense. I'm looking at it. It makes logical sense to me that I've been on live for an hour and 55 minutes, but it doesn't make sense to my brain because that absolutely flew by. It feels like I've only been here for half an hour. I don't know how the live streams always go by so fast. If I was at work and I was spending a 2-hour block, it would be eternal. But we're on live for 2 hours talking about BTS and theorizing and doing all sorts of cool stuff, and it goes by in the blink of an eye. Time flies when you're having fun, right? Ooh, interesting, Javine. Interesting question. To pull together their solo projects with the BU during the Arirang era. Um, that's a really good question. Honestly, so this is part of why I kind of hope that there are solo songs on this album, because I think there's been a lot of, everybody's gone through a different journey during this time period. And everybody, I think, has different views on, what's going on and things like that. So it would be really interesting. And again, the BU is about 7 individual characters, coming together. So it's that would be really interesting too. It would be very cool to have almost final thoughts as they come back together as BTS. Yeah, meta loop. I can so see that. Um, just kind of, and again, which is part of why I think Journey would be so perfect. And just, they all had very different experiences, so it'd be really interesting to, you know, how did that individual journey shape how they view BTS? That would be really interesting to unpack. Yeah, I think you're so right, Javine. It's just like all those solo projects were very diverse. But they might each, have something that kind of matches with the new concept. That would be really interesting to kind of drill down on, honestly, because, to try and think what thoughts and feelings, would carry through. And it's interesting because some of the solo projects in some ways feel like venting emotion. Like I feel like that was very much Namjoon's style. Like he did Indigo to be the last record of his 20s, and I feel like Right Place Wrong Person was very much just like venting a lot of like leftover emotions he had and didn't know how to process. And then I think you have, like for instance Jin's work, I think felt very much like his own mission statement. Happy and Echo very much felt like the things that he wanted to say and that he felt and that he wanted to communicate to Army, so that's a very different vibe. And then you have like, Yoongi's final August D album in the August D trilogy feeling very much like that was just his kind of thoughts and feelings about his life and the world around him, and was really kind of landing the plane on a lot of those ideas. So, everybody kind of had their own life philosophy and their own goal that they wanted to accomplish in their solo work. And I'm curious, it's like, do some of those ideas match up with BTS? Do they not match up with BTS? And it's just, that's kind of interesting to think, like, how will those, are they going to look at those as like, okay, we did those and we're done with that now? Or do they still have like thoughts and feelings they want to talk about left over from that era? And yeah, like you said, don't feed the bears. People change but remain the same. And I know that's very much like, kind of keeping with what Namjoon said in his speech at the UN. I don't know if he still like subscribes to that idea, but I always like that he sort of said all of these versions of me are still me, and that's very much something that I've always liked, and kind of matches with my own personal philosophy as well of I totally get when people go through like huge life changes and they choose to say, oh, I'm a different person now. But for me, in my own personal philosophy, I've always much, more appreciated the idea of like all the versions of me are me. They've just like learned new things, or they've gone through new experiences, or, whatever the case may be. And that would be a very interesting thing too to explore in Arirang, especially if they do choose to do it through a BU sort of lens of looking at it, of just like, imagining that it's like the characters are still the characters, they're just going through different things. Yeah, Javine, I could see that too. I mean, it kind of also reminds me, I could very much see them doing something like they did in Yet to Come, where Yet to Come referenced so many other music videos and concepts and eras. And obviously, it was very overt in Yet to Come because that was the whole idea. I could see them doing a more subtle version of that, and because there's so many themes in the BU that I think could be very subtly included, things like, and I mean, for instance, Jin's song The Astronaut included some references to the BU, like with the truck that picks him up at the end of the video and takes him back into town is very much like the truck in the BU. And so, which slide here. You can see the truck there in the HYYH on stage prologue film, and that's, it's also in Run. And you can very much see that in The Astronaut too. Yeah, I agree with Javine T style. I don't think we can be accused of clowning when we have like absolutely nothing to go on. It's really their own fault, honestly. If they didn't want us to clown, they should have given us things to do. They have to keep us busy or our minds go crazy. But hey, I always look at it this way. When you theorize and you're just, coming up with ideas. You can't really be wrong. You can't really, fault yourself for assuming, because that's part of the fun of theorizing. Yeah, that's true. Meta loop. There's always like a lot of running in the BU, and then Jin did running both in the astronaut and in Running Wild. Oh, that's true too, Javine. Yeah, there was a lot of running and like crazy. There were also a few times that Yoongi ran in Hegum. Um, and even in Amygdala, so it's like I could really see that working too. A lot of running. All right, so I think we'll go ahead and start wrapping it up here. Um, if you have any final thoughts, please do let me know. And of course, as always, this is going to be up on the channel. So if you have any other thoughts, please feel free to leave a comment there and I'll see it. Or if you're on Discord, shoot me a comment over on Discord and we can keep the discussion going, of course. Um, but just to recap, just for those of you who maybe came in a little bit later, for my housekeeping, my August D analysis is out now, so you can catch up on that if you haven't seen it. My next video in progress is going to be The Power of Purple, which is going to be about BTS and ARMY's bond and the history of where Purple came from. I'm hoping to get that up before Arirang. And then my next live stream is going to be Sunday, March 15th, and it's going to be sort of the pre-Arirang theory conversation. So bring your bingo cards. And of course, like I said, if anything changes on that date, if for some reason I have to change that date of that live stream, I'll let you know as soon as possible. But as of right now, I think Sunday, March 15th at the usual, 12 o'clock my time, Eastern Standard Time, is probably going to be what to anticipate. And we'll have some fun doing some pre-theorizing in Arirang. Maybe, hopefully, we'll have a little bit more detail by that time because the album will literally be right around the corner at that point. But if not, we'll just have fun theorizing amongst ourselves. So, oh, thank you so much. Thank you, T Style. I'm so glad that you all enjoyed. I had a lot of fun too. And I had so much fun, making the slides that I made for everything today. So I'm so glad we got to discuss everything together. You all are awesome, and thank you so much as always for being here and chatting with me and having such awesome thoughts. Meta loop, yeah, that's kind of the interpretation that I've sort of been running with. I honestly, and I think honestly, the journeying idea could work for both BTS and ARMY. They had to go away and we waited for them, but I think they, in some ways, are also kind of acknowledging that maybe we went on our own journeys as well, and they're hoping that we're coming back to them. And I really feel, the Arirang folk song having that line of like, oh, if you leave me behind and you make that journey, I know that journey is going to be painful for you. And I just think that is like, I just feel like that would have resonated so much with BTS, knowing that they had to leave and kind of leave us behind. But it'll be very interesting to see. I just, you know every time a K-pop artist comes back, it's called the comeback, but this really is a comeback, and I'm really interested to see how they deal with that idea of just like they're actually coming back, and this is gonna be, it's gonna be really interesting. Yeah, exactly, Javine. It's like, we're all coming back after a long period of time, and it's just like a lot has probably happened in that time period, so it's kind of interesting to come back and see what's what after all that. So I'm very interested to see how they deal with those themes. Yeah, they've said that so many times that they were so nervous of wondering if we'd be back. Right? It's gonna be very interesting. Yeah, we have a lot of interesting times coming with this comeback, and um, my hope is as they do this, and I hope it's very true to themselves, and I also kind of hope it proves to everybody, and not to be petty and vindictive, but I hope it kind of proves to everybody that BTS are they're the rightful kings, basically, and this is why you can never have another BTS, because that talk always makes me very annoyed of just anytime they try and say this group is the next BTS, or, basically when people try to assert themselves over what BTS has kind of, because, hey, BTS paved the way, and whenever people try to assert their dominance over that idea as if that's not actually the case, it makes me so mad. And so I'm just kind of like, I really hope that they can kind of come back and show everybody this is why they're special and this is why they're BTS and successful. And that's, I think, one of my biggest hopes for this. Yeah, Metal Loop. I so agree. I really do get that sense of, and like I said, that's something that always struck me about certain songs on Map of the Soul 7 too, like Make It Right, which technically I think Make It Right is more of a Persona song, but I still consider all of it as part of Mott's. There's very much a wandering theme, and technically that wandering theme can even go back as far as like the Love Yourself era. There's some songs there that have a very wandering theme. But I've always gotten that sense of like a hero's journey type wandering. I've wandered and now I've come back, and you're here waiting for me, is very much a theme that they've been exploring in the past. So and I think what's cool about if they do choose to have this be sort of a journey theme, is there's so many different kinds of journeys. There's actual literal journeys, there's spiritual journeys, there's different ways they could incorporate that theme. Like I think it could be really cool. They could really do some interesting stuff. Javine, exactly. I sort of see a lot of the news of people sort of trying to, shall we say, assert themselves as, oh, I did this thing first, or I have this record or that record, and I just sort of go, okay, yeah, just wait, just wait. But yeah, so that's all I have for you all today. I hope to see you here again on Sunday, March 15th, and we'll deep dive into Arirang a little bit more and talk about what we hope to see on the albums, and really start unpacking all of that. I think that would be really fun and awesome, so I hope to see you all there. Yes, Metaloop, you're so right. I love that idea. So yeah, so I hope if you all want to have fun with the bingo card concept, you can always just like, if you want to just like Google blank bingo templates, or in a previous, do I still have it in here? Do I? Yes, I do. If you want to borrow my bingo card, if you want to take a screenshot and fill it out yourself, that's always an option too, but definitely. Um, am I going to see Arirang in the theater? I am honestly not sure yet. I'm gonna have to check and see if it's in my local theater. But if not, I definitely am going to do the live stream that they're doing and watch it here in my house. Definitely want to be there for the one that they're doing in Seoul the day after the album premieres, the one that they're going to be doing at the Palace. Definitely I'm going to be watching that one on Netflix. And then I'll be seeing about the actual, rest of the full concert. So. All of which are also really good ones to stream, T-Style. We all have to get back into our good streaming habits, because before we know it, we're going to have lots to stream. All right, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and sign off, but I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your amazing observations today. And as always, for hanging out with me and having fun on this Sunday afternoon. I hope you guys had a really nice time. And I hope that your week ahead is a good one. So keep your eyes peeled on more from me, and I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you so much, T-Style. I'm so glad you enjoyed. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here and for your amazing observations. As always, I have a great community. All right. See you all again very soon. Have a great rest of your Sunday. And to any of you who are catching up on the stream, if you had to leave and you're catching up on it later, thank you for being here, and I hope you've been enjoying catching up. Thank you, Javine. You as well. Have a good one. See you all again really soon. Bye-bye.